Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's great to be in community with everyone here. Can we take a moment to thank the organizers who have been working so hard behind the scenes to make this happen? Wonderful, thank you. And then can we also take a moment to thank the hardworking people who have put together our food and who served us today. All right, thank you. As evidenced by that applause, it's clear that we all appreciate the human touch and connection that comes from service. But are we in a moment when the same can be said about the importance of human connection in higher education, for human touch in scholarship, for human ingenuity in the workplace, for human struggle in producing art and scientific breakthroughs? It's not hyperbolic to say that we are currently in the midst of one of the most significant societal disruptions we've seen with the advent of generative AI. GenAI has rapidly become ubiquitous, bringing science fiction into our classrooms, workplaces, and homes well before we've stopped to really make sense of the shocks that it's caused to our systems. Today's panel discussion is an opportunity for us to try to make sense of that disruption collectively and what it means for how we think about academic integrity today. With the emergence of GenAI, many across campus have sought guidance from my team, the Center for Student Conduct, about how to handle suspected misconduct or how to responsibly integrate integrate artificial intelligence into their teaching and into their learning. We consider each of these opportunities as a privilege to support the campus community, but we recognize that we cannot do it alone. In fact, we believe that our work is most effective when it's informed by both best practices and the community norms and values that we all hold here at Berkeley. So today's discussion is an opportunity to engage in that process of sense-making, to shape a collective understanding of how AI is influencing the campus, understanding of academic integrity, our tradition of discovery, rigorous scholarship, and career preparation for the economy of the future. We've brought together a wide range of perspectives through our panel, representing many campus affiliations, including staff, faculty, students, GSIs, and alumni. Importantly, we're also giving the audience an opportunity to engage dynamically with us, which I'll explain in just a moment. Let's turn now to the panel just to briefly introduce themselves and what's informing their perspectives before we dive into what we have in store for you today. We'll start with Teja.
Hello, everyone. My name is Teja. I'm in the data science department, and I've been a graduate student instructor for a little over 8 classes here at Berkeley, spanning across bioengineering, FUNG, computational social sciences, and MCB. I'm really excited to have this conversation today because AI has become very prevalent with both my peers as well as my fellow students. And academic dishonesty is one of those ethical questions that quite often comes up with the prevalent use of AI. So looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists as well in our discussion today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shaily Bajracharya, and I'm a recent graduate of the Master's in Computational Social Science program here at Berkeley. Before this, I also did my undergrad here in data science and psychology and education. And throughout my time as a master's student, I was a GSI for courses across the education department in Data 144, education in a global world, and digital education pedagogy. So I have had some experience both as an undergrad, grad student, and also as a GSI looking through the different courses and how instructors are adapting to the new changes in AI. Currently, I'm also working at the Silicon Valley Equity and Education Institute within the San Francisco Bay University, where we're doing research on K-12 schools across the Silicon Valley schools. Yeah, excited to be here and communicate with everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Larry Jackson. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm Senior Associate Director for Career Education at Berkeley Career Engagement. I oversee a 17-person team that works with the 8 major colleges here at Berkeley, as well as identity populations such as international students, students with disabilities, pre-health, pre-law, and graduate students. My role is also making sure that one-on-one appointments programs are provided for students around career education topics, especially with the disruption that's happened with artificial intelligence. I've been a part of a professional association at the national level looking at career education and outcomes, and well as the infusion of technology into the career education planning process, and being able to bring the perspective of what employers are looking for and what are ways that we can continue to upskill our students to be prepared for the technical workforce and other endeavors is a key reason why I'm here today. So I appreciate everyone's opportunity to be a part of this session.
Hi, everyone. Everyone should know you on this campus, especially the students. But my name is Burcu Tung, and I work in the graduate division as Director of Graduate Academic Conduct and Climate. I was hired to roll out a policy on graduate student academic misconduct, and that's how I was introduced to the concept of academic integrity at a professional level, and also became witness to the complexities of the conduct world through that. I actually have a PhD in anthropology from this school, and I've been here under many roles as a lecturer, as a research coordinator for the McNair program. So in the work that I do, especially in the context of academic integrity, I try to forefront student support and their growth as I negotiate and work with departmental and institutional expectations.
Thanks. Zach Pardos, Associate Professor, School of Education. I also teach a large lecture course in the data science major on data mining and analytics. I think part of the hat that I'm bringing to this conversation is that large lecture class of 600 students and some of the academic misconduct cases that we bring to the center. Also, my research areas of some relevance, been studying AI in education since around 2007. Focusing on AI for knowledge representation. How do we represent knowledge with AI? How is that relevant when it comes to skill learning? And then how is it relevant when we are analyzing the knowledge that might be contained in courses for course equivalency and articulation and transfer and that kind of credit mobility?
I'm Meredith Sadin. I'm faculty at the Goldman School and director of the Center on Civility and Democratic Engagement. I see some familiar faces out there, which is lovely. I teach core curriculum for our Masters of Public Policy graduate students, as well as Masters of Public Affairs graduate students, and so have kind of been riding the wave of the way that AI has really kind of impacted the Goldman School, individuals who are kind of opting in to public service and how they are navigating AI both as a kind of issue in the policy space and also in the classroom and in their individual lives. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. All right, our theme for today's session is sense making. And this is a concept derived from organizational psychology and has been applied across a variety of social institutions and dilemmas to think through how groups ascribe value and meaning to their current understandings when presented with new information. For today, I want us to focus on interactive and intersubjective as the core concepts of our conversation. That is especially to lean into the idea that each of us can have a role in shaping the understanding that we apply to notions of academic integrity, and the characteristics and positionalities that we all bring into the discussion are meaningful. For today's roundtable, we'll be using Panelists, which is an interactive tool, to encourage some engagement and audience participation. If you were to take out your phones and scan that QR code, you should be taken to a quick poll that will open up this conversation for all of us. It will give you an opportunity to weigh in on our discussion, and it will show real-time reaction to the statements. And you can also pose your own questions at the bottom of the page. As more people weigh in, Panelists will start to visualize the disagreement or agreement of some of the statements that are being offered. I've planted a few seed comments into the Panelists just to get the conversation going. I'll show you an example of that, and it's intentionally controversial. The scenario is you've just ordered a pepperoni and ham pizza from an AI-based delivery app. Is it acceptable for the app to add free pineapple slices to your pizza based on your grocery shopping history and because the restaurant was overstocked on pineapples? So some of you who might be in the poll list now may be seeing that question. Others may be seeing other randomly assigned questions, and you can agree or disagree, pass or say you're unsure, and then you can react on the bottom by adding your own questions and statements. You'll also notice that there's a few statements that read something like, responsible AI use for students looks like, or responsible AI use for faculty looks like. If you see that, go ahead and add your own statement. All right. And so without further ado, we'll go to the first question for our panel. Tej, I'd love to start with you and go down the panel here. What does academic integrity mean to you? And how, if at all, has this shifted with the emergence of generative AI?
Yeah, so my answer to this question, I think because of generative AI, has shifted quite a bit. Initially, if you asked me what academic integrity was, I would probably say that it would need to be work completed all by yourself, and any additional sources you use need to be cited, and it needs to be original. I think with the emergence of generative AI, it becomes slightly more complicated because now to produce unique tools, especially in an academic setting, it might mean you would be referencing AI in order to build those tools. So now I think of it more in the context of it doesn't have to be completely done by you in entirety, but you should be able to cite the valuable sources that you've used it, if you've used, even if that means you've used AI.
Thank you. I completely agree with Teja. And based on my experience as a student within the Masters of Computational Social Science and as a GSI too, I've seen that most professors that I've worked with have instructed us to sort of collaborate with the ChatGPT tools as opposed to completely ignoring it or completely depending on it, sort of to use it as a thought partner, and then also to provide a link of all of our conversation history in that so that they can see that we're not just like copying but interacting with them. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Great. Larry, how about yourself?
I fully agree with what Teja shared. It's about being able to appropriately cite that you are using the source. But I also think it's an extension of being authentic with your thoughts and ideas related to how that information is represented. I think one of the key issues is that it's not coming from a voice of authenticity and really speaking in the way in which a student would speak. And I think that's the important part of this is it's okay to receive inspiration from different sources, but cite the source and also make sure that you can translate it into your own verbiage and be able to speak adequately about it if you are questioned about it or if there's an inquiry about what you're sharing. So I think that's the key piece of this, the citation as well as the articulation.
Burcu?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put my institutional hat on, and then I'm going to put my anthropology hat on, but I'll start with the institutional hat. I mean, I think that academic integrity, I'd like to use the Center for Academic Integrity's definition for academic integrity, and they say that it is a commitment to, even in the face of adversity, 6 values. It's honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. And I think it's a great way to frame this to students, especially in the context of our academic values, and many of these overlap with our principles of community at UC Berkeley. But if I'm to put my anthropology hat on, I do think academic integrity is engagement and practice, and there's a lot of hows in what we do. So it's embedded in a social structure, it's relational, it is very specific. There's specific practices in specific academic fields of what is acceptable and what is not. And I also think that thinking about it as a practice focuses on the importance of discernment and the decisions that we make, and of course how we cite our sources. So for me, the emergence of generative AI technologies and their ubiquitous use really brings up this discernment as something that is our duty to converse with our students all the time. Like, how are they reflexive in the way that they're utilizing the tools, and how, what sort of use cases are shortcuts, and what sort of use cases are actually cases in which there's a lot of learning and exploration and a lot of play happening. And you know, I was looking at the uses there. Generative AI is used very extensively, and as instructors, each individual use case is not necessarily picked up on. And even though I work in academic integrity, I don't believe in policing. I don't believe that that is really the right approach here. The right approach is really, for me, bringing into the classroom, in the ways that we teach, in the ways that we communicate the use of these tools, the importance of discerning learning, like thinking about what we think about, thinking about what competencies we bring in, and thinking about what competencies that we actually are potentially losing in the long run, and how that actually affects the value of our educational system, the value of the degrees that our students are receiving. So I also want to say that for me, when I used to teach, I always thought about my classroom as a community of practice. And granted, I taught very small classes, not 600 students. So it was very easy for me to take a relational perspective and engage with students in a personable way, sort of create these, you know, co-create community standards and ethical standards and whatnot, and just not give them a syllabus that has a line of policies. And so before I leave, I want to emphasize that before I finish this, there is a book that has been recently published by Tricia Bertram-Gallant and David Redinger called The Opposite of Cheating. The opposite of cheating, not the opposite of teaching. And it's actually a really fantastic book that frames the challenges that all of you faculty and instructors are facing today in terms of how do we design courses with a focus on integrity and the utilization of these courses, technologies themselves. So they focus a lot on a learner-centered approach and the importance of metacognition, which is, like, for me, it's kind of discernment as well. And also the ethics of the use of these tools. Like, what is the use cases, the ethical use cases, and then how are our use of these tools embedded in this larger worldly relations of power, so.
So I don't have as holistic a philosophy about academic integrity. I was really looking forward to that answer because you're exposed to so many instances of it. So for what it's worth, I'll give an example of how the policy I state in my syllabus has shifted with the introduction of generative AI. And this is a policy that both exists in undergrad education minor and also education major now, a course on digital learning environments. So there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of reading. And then also it's the same policy that I state in the data mining course, which is a lot of coding. And that is, whatever our stated policy is for working with a peer is the same policy for working with an LLM, a ChatGPT AI. So if the assignment says you can work with a peer on constructing this coding assignment, you can work with a peer on writing this essay, then that's the policy for working with ChatGPT. And that if it's an assignment where we expect you to do your own work and not use a peer, we also expect you not to use the peer of ChatGPT. It is, in a way, probably a losing battle, as there are techniques to obscure if ChatGPT was used. But I think it's worth stating that, with this policy, you are expressing the pedagogical and academic integrity environment in which you think it's best for students to learn. And some students will respect that, right? Especially at Berkeley. So it's worth stating that, and it's worth enforcing. There is certainly less effort required when you use ChatGPT, but there's also a minimal effort use of ChatGPT, where you're just pasting the prompt into it. You're not even looking at what it produces, and you copy and paste that into the answer. That's very easy to detect. So enforcing this at least creates this minimum effort, right? If you're going to cheat, at least be critical of, what it produces and give an iteration to it. So I think it's beneficial to keep enforcing things in this age.
I think of academic integrity as kind of three things. The first is kind of do your own work and represent your work as your own, which includes kind of, citing your sources. The second is respecting the learning process. And the third is developing your own voice as a scholar and a learner. And so I think that my sense of what these three things have consisted of really have evolved with AI tools, and my sense of integrity has evolved with kind of just observing how students utilize AI tools and how I utilize AI tools. The first one, do your own work. It was really straightforward kind of when I was in undergrad and graduate school, right? With respect to citing my sources, and if I was using a direct quotation to put quotations around that text. I have attempted to have syllabi that ask students to, to state if they've used an AI tool and to include the prompt. What I haven't asked was for students to include the output because I don't have time to review the output to see what the jump was from the output to kind of the deliverable or product, right? And I also don't have a clear sense of where a potential violation might occur and what types of prompts fall within doing one's own work and finding one's own voice as a scholar. Like, where is that gray area? And it was really validating to see in the poster to my left, kind of talking about faculty ambivalence and kind of excitement and curiosity with respect to these tools, as well as like some real hesitance and doubt, but this overall feeling of ambivalence, right? And this question of, okay, what is possible? What is detectable? What is enforceable? What is within my capacity? How do these things kind of assist in my capacity? And then how do I feel completely overwhelmed when I receive, 60 policy briefs or papers, and have to adjudicate across the use of AI tools and what consists of a violation.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So we can hear there's a pretty robust degree of agreement, as well as some nuance coming through from those descriptions of academic integrity. Zach, as somebody who is working in the field, doing research in the field, I'm curious about what you would say if you were presented as a champion of AI. How would you champion GenAI as a tool to support student achievement and retention today?
I appreciate the phrasing of that. If you were a champion, gives me some cover. So one of the things I would advocate or champion for, and do so in fundraising activities, is utilizing generative AI to shift pedagogies, at least in STEM, to more mastery-based pedagogy. Less focus on high-stakes summative tests, midterms, right? That requires a certain performance, and also mastery learning allows more students to get up to a certain level of the learning objectives. What's difficult in achieving that without generative AI is mastery learning means more practice opportunities, which means you have to produce more assessments. And that takes a long time to produce a quality assessment. Every time I produce an assessment, I'll get a group of students who says, I'm interpreting this one way. I didn't realize, that could be interpreted that. So you go through these iterations, so it's very difficult to do that. What we're finding in some published studies is that one, generative AI is very good for creating variations, and that two, generative AI can be used to simulate learner responses such that you can measure, using methodologies from educational measurement, the difficulty of the variations that are being produced. So you can kind of calibrate them so the variations that are being produced are about as difficult as the original assessment that you created, and colleagues from educational testing services have taken notice of that. There's about a 0.9 correlation of the estimated difficulties when you're using LLMs to estimate the difficulty as if you're using gold standard human respondents. So I think that can usher in a more mastery-based approach in STEM.
Fantastic. What do you think that could look like in 5 years, given the rapid evolution of GenAI? And then also, what would you caution about as we work our way towards that endpoint?
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't progressively replace midterms and finals that are kind of paper and pencil type of tests with proctored mastery learning centers on campus. Maybe there's a way to do it online, but of course that's always going to be tricky. Also, thinking about using generative AI to create mastery learning, you also have to watch out for, and I guess this is the caution, that we're not outsourcing the impetus of the assessment, right, to a source of value other than the faculty, right? The faculty do have that value. And just in my class this year, we had our midterm kind of accidentally exposed within a week of the midterm, and we had to figure out what we're going to do about this. And the determination was, let's use generative AI to create variations. The GSI team helped with that, but then I oversaw what was produced. And there were definitely some variations where I was like, that's not getting at what I really care about, right? So we can't lose oversight of that alignment of the values that we have in the use of generative AI.
Great, thank you for that example. I'd love to hear from Teja and Shaily next on this question. What messages and discourse are informing how you and your peers interpret the implications of generative AI on academic rigor and original scholarship?
I think it's an undeniable reality that generative AI is very accessible to students, and most students are using it, despite sometimes being advised against it by instructors. I was actually one of Professor Pardos' graduate student instructors for his courses. And we ran into encounters where students were, in fact, using ChatGPT despite being asked not to. Few students were caught, but many others were not. And that got me thinking into broader questions about how we perhaps structure exams. And like Professor Pardos mentioned, maybe that means shifting away from some of the current methodologies we're currently using to test students. But I will say, from more of a student perspective, even if a student doesn't want to cheat and they want to go about, producing work as expected by the professor, there becomes this challenge around, hey, all my other fellow students are using generative AI and they're at an advantage and I'm not at an advantage, and I'm going to get a lesser score and I'm going to have to work harder and do poorer because of it. And this was a concern of many students who came into my office hours, but also my fellow students. And so when I hear that, that makes me think more about creating essentially assignments that enable students to use ChatGPT or any open AI or any type of generative AI platform in a way that can be cited responsibly without just simply copying and pasting them onto the answer sheets, like Professor Pardos mentioned. That's like the far end of using it irresponsibly. And I will also say that beyond just academic originality. There's also a learning component that generative AI is able to pose to my fellow students and even me as a student, because in class, we very much learn about basic components, especially around programming. But if we want to sometimes take our projects beyond that and explore beyond what is just given to us, generative AI can also serve as an incredibly useful teaching tool about novel research techniques that can be applied into our projects to take them a step further, to get from that A to that A+ level of accuracy, for example. And so I think that there needs to be both like a balance in terms of how we approach this from the instructor side, but as students, there needs to be this component of like, yes, let's use this as a learning tool, but not necessarily a way of circumnavigating a learning process altogether and just simply copying and pasting answers and solutions.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Teja said. I think this question kind of asks us to think about what really is the purpose of education and how do we enhance learning in a way. Because like Teja said, especially from my personal experience too, in classes, especially like Professor Pardos' classes where there's 500 students and just one professor, it's not possible to always like go to office hours or learn from the professor themselves. And in such cases, I found that talking to generative AI about the content has been very helpful to my learning. And also I've seen my peers and my students do this as well. Also, when it comes to international students who may not be so familiar with the language, or students who in general don't feel comfortable talking to professors in large courses, I found that they extensively rely on ChatGPT and other LLMs to improve on their knowledge or improve on their emails and such as things like that. Based on this, based on what I've seen in my class that I GSI'd, I think we really tried to approach assignments by integrating AI, like so that we're not telling students to not use it and like they secretly use it, but for example, in Professor Christina Maria Serrano's class, we had integrated like Notebook LM and PlayLab AI into the course material itself so that we were exploring ways to use these generative AI tools to enhance our learning. So I think my takeaway would kind of be like, as educators, we explore more of these ways about how to integrate AI so that it's enhancing learning and also redefining what original scholarship means.
Okay, sorry. And to quickly just add to what Shaily was saying, in terms of like assisting students, professors, graduate student instructors, TAs, cannot be available to students 24/7. And if AI can answer questions that we perhaps cannot answer at that time, it still serves an incredibly valuable function, really, especially for international students who very much struggle to keep up sometimes with curriculum because of the language barrier. And so I think as instructors, there needs to be a large level of empathy for these students when approaching their use. As far as academic rigor and original scholarship goes, I don't think this takes away, use of generative AI really takes away from that, as long as it is appropriately cited as used as a tool in the work that's being produced. We use Google, we use other people's work, we cite it. Same thing should go for generative AI.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll transition a little bit to thinking about career outcomes. Larry, I'd love to bring you into the conversation to ask about what are the disruptions that you're seeing as you help our students prepare for their next stages? And then what advice would you give to instructors in this space to help with that process?
Thank you for that question. So I think I want to start with what Tejasvi shared and second that about advising instructors and students in use of it, I think it is so important to look at this as, I wrote this down, a valuable teaching and development tool versus a master tool. I think that it's important that it can be utilized for information gathering, for the opportunity and getting inspiration on how to represent ideas rather than taking and saying, this is my idea. In regards to the career preparation piece, we actually just hosted a program recently with talent acquisition engineers and manager talking about the evolving use of artificial intelligence. And one key thing that came from that discussion was how much they're using critical thinking in their tech interviews to say what's wrong, what's been produced through ChatGPT. What is it that needs to be changed, rather than putting students through a simulation of actually creating the model. They're instead analyzing what's been produced and saying what's wrong with it, what needs to be enhanced. And I think we're at a very unique turning point where we're starting to create new job opportunities that allow students to take what they're learning about use and some of the challenges and doing some form of oversight over large language models. We see prompt engineering positions becoming apparent. We see data analysts positions becoming even more apparent. We're seeing governance and public policy positions becoming more apparent around the use. So I think that this is a very significant but fruitful turning point, because I think with every technological advancement, we always see some disruption of what do we do next, or something is taking a position away, instead of looking at what kind of new job opportunities can be created that are going to support the evolution of this new technology. I might be dating myself with two examples that I give here, but I look at ChatGPT in some veins of who remembers Cliff's Notes back in the day, right? We would look at Cliff's Notes for a summary of what was published, and we were told that not to use that, but it provided some overview of what was actually cited and read in a particular publication. And I'm also going to bring it back to real life. Who remembers current times, who remembers the development of social media in the early 2000s and the disruption that caused with putting information out on the front? Who remembers their MySpace page? I do, right? So I think that there's an opportunity to walk alongside of the advancement that's taking place. And yes, there's definitely some oversight needed in order to make sure that it stays ethical and grounded. But I don't see this as a master tool that replaces everything, but a tool that'll help us evolve in the way that things are done. So that's the disruption that's happening.
That's great. Larry, what are you seeing as students think about graduate programs with this as well?
Yeah, so this is where we are seeing students that are actually using this to create their personal statements, create this for when they're applying to law school. And there's actually been some very direct feedback from admissions panels about not being able to use generative AI with creating of these applications, especially in the case of law school. So, we're doing a lot of advisement around students and vetting what they've created and saying, tell us more about, what is your goals professionally, and seeing what's the gap in them being able to articulate that in the moment when they have this prepared document in front of us for review, and saying there's clearly a discrepancy. There's some things that need to be adjusted that makes it more of your voice as far as what's on the paper. So we've seen that there are some very explicit guidelines from admissions practices of not using this, but also a lot of coaching for the student on how this can be a developmental tool, but making sure you're putting it in a voice and language that's resonant to you. So when you do authentically represent yourself in these settings, people know it's your voice. So it's definitely been a tug and pull.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, for this next question, I'd love to hear from Meredith first, and then Burcu, if you could weigh in as well, that'd be wonderful. How do we take into consideration the role of power in shaping these discourses? Whose voices are missing from the conversation? Who would you like to bring in? How would you invite them in? And can AI help with that?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I'm going to just answer the first one, but look forward to kind of hearing from everybody on the panel because I need some good ideas. With respect to power, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this, right? I asked my first year MPP students, who here has ever used AI in some process for compiling a lit review. This is a classroom of 50 students. One person raised her hand. I raised my hand. I was shocked because I knew it was happening. And I realized right there that there was no way to have an open conversation about what was happening with students who were the kind of only source of information that I had to kind of co-create a version of the syllabus that could work with reality, right? And even kind of admitting like, oh, here's how I find it helpful, right? People did not change their kind of answers. So, I think standing there realizing that I was this kind of the power that was silencing students in the room was kind of very profound. The second is, I think something that other panelists have said really well with respect to AI being, an important tool. The use of AI and kind of the rule book imposed can often reflect, privileged academic cultural viewpoints, which may not always consider people that can really benefit from it, right? Non-traditional students, students with disabilities, students for whom English is not their first language, marginalized students. We also know that these students, right? We have social science research that indicates these students are less likely to operate in a gray area, potentially because they feel more that they have less, that they are more, I don't want to say policed, right? But because stakes are so high. And therefore, who can afford to operate in a gray area where there is this ambivalence and potentially ambiguity? And those are the students that may not necessarily benefit from some of the kind of things that AI tools provide the most.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to address this issue of bias actually in this question part. So let me just jump into that since you've said that. I mean, I do think that these technologies do provide a leveling opportunity for a lot of our students. But from from what I see from an academic integrity standpoint and our own personal biases, what I am noticing is that those students who end up being quote unquote caught by their instructors tend to be students who are non-native speakers. So, and this is then, what does it mean that even though we know most of our students are using these technologies one way or another, when we have like a no AI use policy or we have no conversations in the classroom in the context of generative AI use, what is the institutional responsibility to respond to then cases that show up as potential biases? So I find that question really interesting and part of this power dynamic. I also think that, institutionally, it's in our power to communicate with students in a way much more clearly what we expect of them through our policies, both institutionally and also in the classroom as well. The policy that I work with failed the a readability scale. It was at the highest level, which means basically your policy has failed and it's really not accessible to your students. And so how do we work with things like that? How do we, and I think generative AI is a great opportunity to, especially on the policy side, work with students and sort of letting them feed these policies into these LLMs and having them explore like the true meanings that's behind all of these difficult words, long sentences, that one comma, that changes the meaning of a sentence. So there's all of that. And again, I'm going to put my anthropology hat on, and I'm going to talk about power in the context of, in all of these use cases, what are the implications down the line? Like, what are the implications 5 years down, 10 years down? We are feeding private companies a lot of information, and they are amassing a lot of power, and they are building these incomprehensibly large data centers that are, environmental disasters. And so how do we work with that duality? So how do we potentially even utilize generative AI, what it brings, in a way that disrupts sort of the power structures that allow that to happen? Because, yes, it's a leveling field, but 10 years down the line, if we see that we've actually just recreated the power structures that are already inherent in society today, then we, I guess, missed an opportunity.
I'd like to add to that, if that's okay. Thinking about this, I think that there are three critical voices that would be really helpful to be a part of this discussion. I fully agree with the representation of historically marginalized students and the ability that it provides for them to get a level playing field with articulating their experience, articulating concepts, being able to fully process information. I think there's a lot of value with that. But I think another two key voices that are missing from this are also our private sector employers, and better understanding the rationale and purpose behind the creation and use of artificial intelligence. And this is not just looking at tech companies, we're looking at healthcare companies, we're looking at social service agencies, we're looking at business and consulting, to really bridge the gap about why are these being utilized within their organization and what is the goal that it's accomplishing for greater society. So there's greater understanding as to why it's being created, rather than potentially thinking it's just a for-profit enterprise. And I think the other party that's missing to this conversation is our elected officials, to better understand what are some of the concerns and hesitancy associated with artificial intelligence that's prompting them to be either pro or averse to utilization of artificial intelligence. And I think bringing these missing voices together with individuals like ourselves that are on this panel can really help create a think tank around this topic, but maybe identify some potential areas for alignment that are really serving the social good, that are really helping to develop the talent for the future, so that there is less resistance around forums like these where it may be feeling more partisan.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Larry, and all of the panelists. This is a great opportunity for us to see how our participants have been engaging with this as well, our audience members. So let's take a look at the poll list. I have some really interesting results. Would love to show you. Okay, so this is the poll list report that I was describing. It's kind of meta, right? Using an AI tool while we're talking about AI. So that's kind of interesting. But let's refresh this because more than 3 people voted. I'll show you how many we have now. 97 of you were participating while our panelists were discussing these questions. Additionally, the tool was able to start to group several of you together. So 55 people were starting to get grouped. Out of the 97 people who participated, there were over 1,000 votes across these questions. The pineapple pizza, Hawaiian pizza question. Meredith is going to be disappointed because she agreed that this would be wonderful. This had significant disagreement. 55 voters, or 75%, did not think this was appropriate.
Consensus.
That's right. Something that was sparked by a audience member. Someone wrote, "Responsible use of AI for campus staff looks like disclosure about uses of AI in relation to campus purposes." Example, course material design. That got a good amount of votes. Consensus, about 90% of the voters who weighed in on that one was in support. a question: students pursuing degrees in the humanities should be given opportunities to explore how GenAI can be a part of their learning and scholarship. 85% of you agreed on that. You can see how this gets visualized here on this plot graph, and then all of the statements can get categorized. So I really enjoy using Polis in my research and in some of my work. And so I would encourage this group to connect with me if you're interested to learn more about how to use Polis in your research or in just gathering consensus. That gives us some time for questions, traditional Q&A. If anybody has been thinking about a question they'd like to ask for our panelists, we have time for about 2, maybe 3 questions.
I'm curious about ability to actually be able to assess misconduct. And I remember I went to a talk like this maybe a year ago where the recommendation was that using tools like Turnitin.com were so not effective in assessing use of AI that the suggestion was not to use it because the impact of accusing a student who didn't use AI was worse than than assessing the use of it. And I'm just curious, that was a year ago, and I'm curious how you think of this today, using these tools to help us assess academic misconduct. Do you think what's the cost benefit there essentially?
I've graded quite a bit now, and usually when it comes to assessing if generative AI has been used, especially if the assignment is computational, it becomes a little challenging. But a lot of the times when students have essentially exactly replicated work, we start to feel like there could be signs of generative AI usage, because it's either that or they copy off of each other. Because sometimes when you feed something and it's never been taught anything before, you'll get pretty much the same output. But beyond that, in terms of mitigating use of AI, I've had some professors who've come up with very creative solutions to do so. They've essentially implemented web applications where you have to complete your assignments on that essentially don't let you go to any other type of platform because they lock you into that platform until it has been completed. This might mean, for example, if it's a written assignment, you have to type up your assignment into that application. You can't copy and paste it from somewhere else. You can't transfer and go to other sources. You have to stay on there. As far as going further and answering your questions about the implications of accusing students of using generative AI, perhaps even if they haven't, that becomes a little bit of a slippery slope. I know that, for computational assignments, for example, there's no way for us to definitively 100% say generative AI has been used. And for a lot of students, that can be very pressuring. I know some students who are like, oh, my code looks a little bit too standard. Do I have to change it? Do I have to put comments in just so it looks like generative AI hasn't been used, even if they haven't used it? And so we start to sometimes create a sense of anxiety amongst students who wouldn't necessarily use generative AI per se, and we're basing it off of no certain methods to automatically say it has been used.
I just quickly wanted to give voice to some work in kind of social sciences and the arts, simply because I'm not reviewing code necessarily, and so it is clear it's not always clear. It takes a lot of time and effort to review whether sources have been hallucinated, right? That is kind of the lowest hanging fruit. But if you know source material well enough and you don't recognize sources or they seem kind of like a mishmash of a few different sources, right? That is a flag. Is that a flag that I then kind of move forward and kind of begin an official process. Is that something that I uncover? Is that just a mistaken citation? I think there's also instances of kind of stating claims that actually you're familiar with the work, and the work actually does not necessarily state those claims. However, in my current position, I am reviewing reports across policy spaces for external research partners that I don't necessarily always have deep substantive expertise on. And so what's perceived as, low-hanging fruit actually is quite time-consuming. And again, this gray area. And I could say more about, as one political scientist put it, writing getting better and ideas getting a little bit worse. So one, Brian Klaas, who's a political scientist at Carleton, has kind of coined this term glittering sludge, which is harsh. But this idea of a regression to the mean with respect to kind of a large class, that now all of a sudden the ideas look very similar to one another, though they're expressed cogently. There's some slippage in between concepts, right? But again, it's really difficult to adjudicate.